I never thought of myself as a cat person. Not because I didn't like animals, I did, but because life already felt heavy enough. After my divorce 2 years ago, I'd been living alone in a small, single-story house in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. I worked remotely as a graphic designer, rarely saw my neighbors, and had become accustomed to the quiet hum of solitude. It was late October, the kind of damp, restless night when rain drizzles without stopping, the air smells of wet leaves, and the cold seems to soak straight through your sweater. I was about to switch off the living room lamp when I caught movement outside, just beyond the front porch light. There, under the dim yellow glow, stood a small shape, a cat. She wasn't meowing or pawing at the door, she was just sitting there, tail wrapped neatly around her paws, staring at me through the glass with wide, unblinking green eyes. Something about her gaze wasn't pleading. It was almost assessing. I hesitated, hand on the doorknob. It wasn't unusual for neighborhood cats to wander through yards, but she had no collar, and her fur looked soaked to the skin. Her whiskers drooped with rainwater. She looked like she'd been out there for hours. When I finally opened the door, a sharp draft swept in, carrying the scent of damp earth and maple leaves. The cat stepped forward without hesitation, as though she'd been invited. "Hey there," I murmured, feeling absurd for talking to her. She walked past me with quiet certainty, her paws leaving faint prints on the hardwood floor, and sat herself near the couch. I rummaged through the kitchen, found a chipped ceramic bowl, and poured in some milk. I knew milk wasn't ideal for cats, but it was the only thing I had that wasn't coffee or wine. She lapped it up greedily, the tip of her tail flicking in rhythm. I decided she could stay the night. Tomorrow I'd take her to a local vet, check for a microchip, maybe post her photo in the neighborhood Facebook group. I told myself I was being practical, but deep down, I already suspected this wasn't going to be a temporary arrangement. The next morning, the rain had given way to a pale, hesitant sunlight. The cat, still without a name, had spent the night curled in a tight ball at the foot of my bed, barely moving except for the rise and fall of her breathing. I made coffee, sliced a banana for myself, and scrambled eggs for her. She ignored them completely, choosing instead to inspect the corners of my living room as though mapping the place. Around 10 a.m., I loaded her into an old pet carrier I'd borrowed from my sister years ago and never returned. The cat didn't resist, but her eyes stayed locked on mine, a silent question in them. The local veterinary clinic was a small brick building sandwiched between a laundromat and a coffee shop. Inside, it smelled faintly of antiseptic and cedar shavings. A receptionist in blue scrubs gave me the kind of smile you reserve for people who have just done something decent. I explained how the cat had appeared on my porch and that I wanted to check for a microchip before deciding what to do next. The vet, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a voice like warm gravel, gently scanned the cat's neck with a handheld device. A faint beep broke the silence. "Well," he said, glancing at the screen, "she's chipped, registered to someone named Laura Mitchell." My stomach did a strange little flip. "She's from, let's see, Hillsboro. That's about 30 miles west from here. And according to this, she was reported missing in July 2019. I blinked. July 2019. That was over 3 years ago. The vet continued. That's a long time for a cat to be missing. Want me to call the owner? Something in me hesitated. Maybe it was selfishness, maybe curiosity, but I nodded. He stepped out to make the call. The cat sat on the metal exam table, tail curled, eyes half closed, as if none of this concerned her. When the vet returned, his expression had softened. "She's on her way here," he said quietly. "She says she thought the cat was dead." It took about 40 minutes for the woman to arrive. During that time, I sat in the clinic's small waiting area with the cat in her carrier on the floor beside me. She seemed calmer than I expected, almost like she knew what was coming. The bell over the door jingled, and in walked a woman in her late 30s, wearing a puffy navy jacket and clutching a set of car keys so tightly her knuckles were white. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes were already wet. The vet greeted her quietly and gestured toward me. "Laura, this is the woman who found your cat." Laura's eyes flicked down to the carrier, and her hand went to her mouth. She knelt on the floor, unzipped the mesh door just enough for the cat to poke her head out. "Oh my God," Laura whispered, her voice breaking. "Sage, it's you." Say, the name seemed to fit her perfectly. The cat didn't hesitate. She stepped forward into Laura, arms like no time had passed at all. Laura buried her face in Sage's fur, sobbing in short, shaking bursts. I felt something in my chest tighten, a mixture of joy and something else I couldn't name yet. Laura looked up at me. She disappeared right after we moved. She slipped out the door while the movers were unloading boxes. We searched for weeks. Posters, shelters, Facebook, nothing. I thought. She stopped, pressing her lips together, unable to finish. I could see the years in her eyes, the way grief had etched itself in fine lines. She kept thanking me, over and over, until I told her it was okay, that I was just glad Sage was going home. But here's the thing, when Laura stood up, holding Sage, the cat looked back at me. Just a quick glance, but it landed like a question mark in my gut. I drove home from the clinic with an odd heaviness in my chest. By all accounts, this was a happy ending. A lost pet reunited with her family after years apart. But the quiet in my house that evening felt sharper than usual, as though Sage had carried something out the door with her. The next few days passed in the usual rhythm. Work emails, reheated dinners, scrolling aimlessly through social media before bed. But every time I walked past the front porch, I found myself glancing out, half expecting to see a small figure sitting there in the rain again. On the fourth evening, I got a message on Facebook from someone named Laura M. "Hi, I hope this isn't weird, but I wanted to thank you again for finding Sage. You really don't know how much this means to me. Also, I was wondering if you might want to come over for dinner sometime. My kids would love to meet the person who brought her home." My first instinct was to decline politely. I wasn't in the habit of accepting invitations from strangers, and I'd built such high walls around my life that even a friendly dinner felt like scaling a mountain. But I could still remember the way Sage had looked back at me in the clinic, like she was nudging me toward something. So I said yes. That Friday evening, I drove to a quiet cul-de-sac in Hillsborough. Laura's house was modest, with a basketball hoop over the garage and string lights glowing on the porch. She greeted me at the door with a warmth that made my usual awkwardness shrink a little. Inside, the air smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. Two kids, a boy of about 10 and a girl maybe 7, darted into the living room, each holding a cat toy. Sage was in the middle of it, sleek and content, batting lazily at a feather wand. Dinner was simple, but the conversation was. Laura told me about her move, the year Sage went missing, and the long, drawn-out loneliness that followed. I told her a little about my own solitude, though I kept most of the harder truths to myself. When I left that night, Sage trotted to the doorway and sat there as I stepped into the chilly air. Her eyes followed me down the walkway. I didn't know it yet, but that was the start of a chain reaction, one that would quietly dismantle the life I thought I'd chosen for myself. The following week, I got another message from Laura. "Hey, we're having a small neighborhood barbecue on Saturday. Come by if you're free. Sage would be very happy to see you." It was the kind of casual invitation I'd grown accustomed to ignoring. In the years after my divorce, I'd mastered the art of polite refusal. Sorry, busy that day, or maybe next time. But this time, I hesitated. The truth was, I missed her. Not just Sage, but the feeling I'd had in Laura's kitchen, the smell of dinner cooking, the sound of kids laughing, the hum of a house that felt alive. My own home, by comparison, was too quiet, too still. So I went. Laura's backyard was strung with the same warm porch lights I'd seen before, and the air was thick with the smell of grilled vegetables and burgers. A few neighbors stood in loose circles, talking over paper plates and red Solo cups. And there was Sage, weaving between the legs of lawn chairs, occasionally pausing to sit beside someone as though she were checking in on each guest. When she spotted me, she trotted over, tail high, and brushed against my calf. "That's her person," I heard one of the kids announce proudly to a friend. "The one who found Sage." It was such a small sentence, but it did something to me. Her person. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged to someone, even if that someone was a cat who technically belonged to someone else. Over the next few months, I started seeing Laura's family more often. Sometimes it was for dinner, sometimes for a quick visit when I happened to be in Hillsborough. I met her neighbors, learned their names, even exchanged phone numbers. It felt strange at first, to have people wave when they saw me, to get texts inviting me to community events. But the strangest part was realizing how much I'd missed it. And through it all, Sage was there. She'd curl up on my lap when I visited or follow me from room to room like a silent shadow. It was as if she'd decided I was part of her circle now, and that was that. Looking back, I don't think it was an accident that she ended up on my porch that rainy night. Cats are unpredictable, sure, but Sage, she seemed to know exactly where she needed to go. Winter was settling in, painting the streets with rain and early dusk. I found myself waking up earlier, making time for small rituals I hadn't done in years, brewing coffee slowly, opening the curtains to let in the gray morning light, even going for short walks around the block. It wasn't just the weather changing. It was the subtle pull of connection that had begun to grow inside me. Sage was part of that. She'd curl up beside me on the couch as I worked, purring softly, grounding me when my mind spiraled. She'd greet me at the door when I came home, a tiny beacon of warmth in an otherwise quiet world. And then there was Laura and her family. My phone buzzed more often with messages. How are you? Want to join us for movie night? Need a hand with anything? I was relearning how to be around people, how to share parts of myself without fear of being judged or left behind. One evening, after a dinner at Laura's, I caught myself laughing genuinely, the kind of belly laugh I hadn't had in years. The kids had been trying to convince me to play a board game, and despite my initial protests, I'd given in. That night, walking back to my own house, I felt lighter, almost like I was stepping out of a shadow I hadn't realized had been clinging to me for years. Sage had brought me a gift, not just her presence, but a bridge back to life, back to people. Months had passed since that rainy night when Sage showed up on my porch. I'd gone from living in silence to filling my days with voices and laughter. It wasn't a perfect transformation. There were still moments when loneliness crept in, but I had a new foundation to stand on. Sage had become more than just a cat. She was a companion who asked for nothing but gave everything in return. But more importantly, she had become a link between me and the world I'd shut out. One chilly evening, I sat with Laura and her kids around the fireplace. Sage lay curled in my lap, purring softly. Laura looked over and smiled. "You really saved her," she said quietly, "but I think she saved you too." I nodded, feeling the truth in her words. It wasn't just about rescuing a lost cat. It was about finding my way back to people, to connection, to life. Sometimes, the smallest things show us the biggest truths. And sometimes, a stray cat on a rainy night is exactly what we need to come home. The weeks following that first barbecue turned into a steady rhythm of small, meaningful moments. I found myself looking forward to Laura's messages, to the casual invites that slowly pulled me out of my shell. One rainy afternoon, Laura's daughter, Emma, showed up at my door with a handmade card. "For you and Sage," she said shyly, holding out the crayon-scrawled drawing of a cat with a big heart. It was such a simple gesture, but it melted something inside me, a reminder that kindness often comes wrapped in small packages. Sage, for her part, had become a neighborhood celebrity. Kids at the park would call out her name. Neighbors waved when she prowled their lawns. It was as if she carried a little piece of warmth everywhere she went. At work, I noticed the change too. I was less distracted, more patient with my clients. My creative energy, which had felt drained for so long, began to return. Maybe it was the comfort of having a soft presence waiting for me at home, or the new connections that made life feel less isolating. One night, while editing a design project, Sage jumped onto my desk and curled up beside my keyboard. I smiled, realizing she had become more than a cat in my life. She was a quiet companion through all the highs and lows. Not everything was easy. Some nights, old fears crept in, whispering doubts and pulling me back into isolation. There was a Friday when I almost canceled plans to meet Laura and her family. My heart raced, and a familiar tightness gripped my chest. But then Sage appeared, brushing her head against my leg, her green eyes steady and patient. I took a deep breath and went anyway. That night, sitting around Laura's dining table, I realized how much I had changed. I shared a little more about myself than usual, even laughed at a story Laura's son told about a squirrel that had stolen a sandwich. It was in those moments, messy, imperfect, but real, that I started to reclaim my life. Sage had not just found her way home. She had led me back to mine. A year has passed since that rainy night when Sage appeared on my porch. Since then, my life has shifted in ways I never imagined possible. I'm no longer the person who avoided calls and stayed locked inside. I'm part of a community now, people who check in, invite me to their lives, and share the messy, beautiful chaos of everyday moments. Sage still curls up on my lap every evening, a quiet reminder of how a small act of kindness can ripple outward in ways we never expect. Sometimes, when I catch her watching me with those steady green eyes, I think she understands. Not just the world around her, but the way she saved more than just herself that night. She saved me too. And in that, I found a new kind of home.